On your whiteboards, draw out what HTML this will produce. What other tags could you apply to this, and think about why. There's an element of repetition here. Think about the programming that you've done. Why do you think this is an issue, and how could we solve this? Today we're going to be looking at CSS. This is the extension to HTML. Make sure you finish the HTML lesson first.
Here are the key words from this lesson. You should have an understanding of all of them by the end of the lesson.
Remember, there's a difference between HTML, CSS and JavaScript. HTML is the structure of the website, CSS is the style, and JavaScript is the interactivity. These are the HTML tags that we are using. Now you should have a good understanding of these and start to have a really clear understanding of how to use them. So CSS, remember, is used to style a website. It's another language which we embed inside HTML. This allows us to give certain styles to parts of web pages.
When you're using CSS, you can embed it directly into HTML. You need to use the curly brackets. There's ones shown on the screen now. You can actually create your own styles. Here's an example of some HTML code with some CSS embedded into it. We will have a look shortly at the different ways you can use CSS, but here we're setting the body and the background colour to aqua, the font sizes, the colours and the font family of the H1 tag. We're changing the P tag to have a font size of 15 and a font family. And then finally, the image tag, we're giving a border radius of 50%. There are actually three ways that you can use CSS. The first one is an external style sheet. This is an external file where all your CSS is. The next two are actually internal. This means they're inside the HTML. An internal style sheet sits in the head of the HTML. And you use style brackets and all your CSS sits inside that, and we'll look at these more shortly. Inline means you actually put it inside one of the tags, usually in the body of your HTML. For this course you need to know the following tags: background colour, border style, border width, colour with name and hex colours, font families, font sizes, heights and widths. We'll look at some of these CSS files shortly. First of all, let's try some basic CSS. We're going to have a look at an inline style. You can see here our H1 tag. We have style, and then we have equals. We tell it the colour. Notice the spelling of colour, it's the American colour, and the colour that we want, such as blue. This all sits inside the tag. This gives it what we call attributes. This is easy to change for a small part of the website. However, if we've got large parts which we want in a certain style, this is not going to be useful. We'd have to have a duplication of code if we wanted to reuse it, and it would probably cause a non-standard website. You can see some of the standard colours in the names and hexadecimals by using the links shown on the screen. Remember, you need to have an understanding of how to use both of these. So your task is to create a basic HTML page and add some inline CSS. Make sure you use some colours using names and hexadecimal. The second type is an internal style sheet. Now this sits in the head of your HTML. The idea is we can set a whole style for the whole web page. So for the example I've shown, you've got H2 and colour red in the curly brackets. This is going to change the H2 style for all HTML. Whenever you use H2, it's always going to be that style. For this task, I want you to try creating an internal style sheet. That means using the style HTML tags. And then try changing one or two of the different styles shown on the screen. Remember, these are the ones that you're going to have to learn. The third type is the external style sheet. This is where we have a unique and individual style sheet separately from the HTML. Just a note on this that the CSS file must be in the same location as your HTML. If you look in our text, we have to link it to the style sheet. So for example, rel equals style sheet, and using that H reference to find the actual style sheet. You must save a CSS file as a .css, but it can be written in any editor. However, you shouldn't use HTML. The advantages of doing this is it's easy to use. If you've got several websites, you could apply the same style to different websites. But if you lose the CSS file, the website is not going to pick up the style sheets. Your next task is to create a CSS style sheet and apply it directly to your HTML. Here are a few examples. You always have the HTML tag, so body, and inside that you'd give it names and all the different attributes. You could choose them just like this. So what would happen if you had an external style sheet and then you added an inline style? Well, there's actually a priority of CSS to stop this from happening and causing confusion. We give priority to the order that CSS is read. So the first thing it would apply is an inline style sheet. So if you have an external style sheet built already, and then you wanted to change one part of that website, well, you could just add some inline CSS. The lowest priority is the internal style sheet. I now want you to go through all the different CSS attribute tags that you're going to be using. I want you to tell me what their use is and give me an example of the tag. We're now going to take CSS to the next level using ID elements. You can actually create your own styles which can be used again and again. So you don't have to set, for example, the P tag to a certain type. You can give it a name. You start your own with a hashtag, give it a name, and then just like you did before, you'd open your curly brackets and put the attributes of that tag inside the curly brackets. When you're using it, however, if you look in the HTML code on the right hand side, you need to use the ID attribute. So inside the P tag, the paragraph tag, we have ID equals para1. I now want you to create your own tag. Try this now. Now you may want to change a certain tag so that it can be applied at certain points. Here we've got the center tag, which you can use as an attribute in HTML. But you might not always want it to be a certain style or a certain colour, so red. So the majority of the time you might want it to be black as normal, but on certain points you might want it to be red. So we can use a CSS class selector. In this way you use a dot center. Here you can see the text is always going to be in the center as you'd expect, but also the colour is red. Here you can see another example. You've got p.center, so a paragraph which you want to be centered, and look at the spelling of center, remember it's ER. Whenever we have p.center, we want that to be red. In this way, when we use the p tag, we can have different versions of it. So as you can see here, the first line is not going to be affected by the text becoming red. However, the second class, we're actually using the class of center, and you can see that has turned red. Look how that has been referenced. So p class equals center. I now want you to create a website, create a page where a student can submit details to enrol into sixth form. So, a home page for our school, Thornley, where they can be submitting their details. It doesn't need to work, but you could just try and create the form for it.